This is the Extra Point Podcast. During this podcast, we will dive deeper into our Sunday teaching and share practical next steps for your faith journey. Now, let's kick off the Extra Point.
Hey, and welcome to the Extra Point Podcast. My name is Anna Blake, and I'm the youth pastor here at Southridge Church. Joining us, as usual, is our friend Scott, our lead pastor here, and we are going to take a deeper dive into Sunday's sermon. If this is your first time joining the Extra Point Podcast, make sure you subscribe and follow, even share with a friend so that they can take that next step in diving a little bit deeper into what we were challenged with and taught on Sunday. So to get us started, let's kind of get a little bit of a breakdown of Sunday's teaching, where we heard that there is a root to our anger, and that is what really needs to be addressed.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago we talked about how we need to get rid of all anger, and it just occurred to me last week that that's not one of those things that just magically happens, because I was taken back to what I learned in a pastoral care class in seminary, which anger is a secondary issue, like a secondary emotion. So therefore, if we're going to get rid of all anger in our life, we actually have to deal with the primary thing that's going on. And for a lot of people, it's anger is only the fruit of what's going on, because that's the safer, more socially acceptable emotion to have. Whereas a lot of times that you see anger, there's more like hurt. There's more embarrassment. There's shame. There's guilt. There's what somebody said to me when I was, in elementary school, or it was that dad walked out on me, and there's some sort of wound there, and it always manifests as anger. And everyone pats us on the back for our anger because that's a socially acceptable emotion. Whereas it's, especially for guys, I think this is turning some, and it should, but especially for guys. They get such a rap for being angry, but that's also because most of our culture has told them that they're not supposed to look weak.
Right.
And so we don't like all the angry men, but we also don't like weak men that go, well, the reason I am like this is because,
Yeah, my feelings were hurt.
Yeah, my feelings got hurt.
Yeah.
It's like, I joked about it on last week's podcast, but it's a real thing, like little man syndrome. Like if you ever see a little tiny dude that's just super angry, it's because he's tiny, he's upset about that because he's not the stature that he was told that he's supposed to be as this big, strong man or whatever. And it's like, that's a silly example of like dudes that maybe they got abused as kids. Maybe they just had a horrible example of what it means to be a man in their life, and all they're doing is simply hiding all of that pain.
Yeah.
Because they're supposed to be the man of the house, or whatever it is, and they never go and actually get the actual issue fixed. They never going to counseling is like a novel idea for a lot of people,
Right.
especially Christians, where Christians had such a stigma for so long about mental health type issues and counseling and medication and all that. Oh, that's wrong. You just need to have more faith.
Yeah.
And so you get a lot of Christians that are even opposed to going and dealing with a lot of this stuff. Like they feel if I was abused as a kid, it's more Christian of me to just sweep that under the rug, forgive that, and move on like nothing's wrong. And it's like, well, that'll just never work. Whatever we sweep under the rug, there will always be a bump in the rug that will continue to trip us up until we just pick the rug up and actually clean it out.
Yeah, it's good.
And I wish with everything in me that this process was simple as what I'm explaining it to be.
Right.
Right. If there was really a rug that could just be popped up and swept out, that would be amazing. But as I shared Sunday in my own journey with this, I'm on 7 years to identify the problem.
Yeah.
7 years to identify the problem. Who knows how long the fix will come. And I know for all of our super Christian folks, they'll be like, prayer will just take it away like that. And for some people, yes, the Lord will heal them in the blink of an eye. And for other people, He will allow them to walk through a process that will make them stronger on the other end. and He won't bring that healing immediately. And so I wish it was an easy thing that I'm saying that we need to do. It's not, but it's a completely necessary thing if we're ever going to get free of anger. Because as someone that struggles with anger, like I can tell you, I don't like it.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
tired of it. I don't want to be like that anymore. And so it's like the old adage: you'll never change until the pain of staying the same is finally, like great enough. And I think that's where everyone has to get to. Eventually, you have to cause enough damage through your anger to go, okay, maybe I'll schedule an appointment with a counselor.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll come talk to a pastor. Maybe I'll try this prayer thing out, or whatever it is, whatever your first step is. But I think we'll all get there eventually.
Yeah, I know. Whenever we had gone through this, I met with our group, and for our listeners, if you're not a part of a group, make sure you are to process these ideas with others who are working towards following Jesus also. And as we were sharing, I don't know if it's the privilege to share because it felt like really uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but I got the chance to share with the group that I'm in. They've never really seen me angry or things like that, and I had to confess that it's actually internal. It's a burn that just exists, and it's just simmering. And I think that sometimes we think that outbursts is anger. We think that whenever somebody loses their mind over a decision that was made at work or that was made at home, or those types of things, that's the outburst is the anger, when really it can be so much more than that. And that's why I loved the idea of the root, because we don't see roots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a reason why we call folks that don't outwardly really explode passive aggressive.
Mm-hmm.
We don't call them. We still call them aggressive, right? The aggressive is still in the name.
Yeah.
Because that internal anger is still anger, and it's still every bit as damaging.
Yeah.
Because what you'll do is you may not have the guts to let come out of your mouth what you thought, but you already thought it, so you already felt it, and it will manifest in areas where you feel safe to let it out. Then you will.
Yeah.
So especially for people in ministry, if you're like the internal anger type, you probably don't feel good about lashing out at someone in your congregation, but when you're at home behind closed doors, you probably don't care to do it to your husband.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's safe, and he's supposed to be okay with that or whatnot.
Yep.
That's supposed to be where I vent, right?
Yes.
And, or for me, I'll do that to my kids or whatever. I won't yell at a kid from our church.
Yeah.
I'll yell at my kid, right? And so, there's no such anger or whatever it is that's going on that doesn't end up being somewhat damaging, whether or not you're the fly off the handle, which everyone will get to that point eventually, right? Like a pot where the pressure just builds and builds and builds and builds. Eventually the top comes off of everybody, in that situation. But, some people just have, I guess, sturdier pots that can handle more pressure, whereas some of us, just the top flies off every day.
Yeah.
But all of that gets traced back to something in our life that we're not dealing with.
Yeah.
Right, as I looked out Sunday, I was thinking, man, I can probably tell you what a lot of the people in the room, what their deal is, because I've been there for them in those moments.
Mm-hmm.
And if they haven't, those in our congregation that have lost someone, if they haven't properly grieved that, I can tell on the other side of their loss that they're a little bit different than what they were beforehand. And of course, we're all going to get marked by loss in that way, but we have to deal with it. Or people that before a divorce were one way now, even though it may look like they're doing great. We can tell there's something going on that we all have to deal with whatever that thing is. And until we do, things just aren't going to be like they should be in our life at all. We're going to make a lot of bad decisions. We're going to make a lot of enemies. We're going to push people away. And it just hurts. To be angry constantly, it just, you end up causing so much damage that you either have to become a narcissist, or you have to become like a psychopath to where like hurting other people doesn't bother you,
Yeah.
or else you'll just continue to add to the own shame and guilt. Because like that's what anger does in my life. It just like perpetuates. Like if my anger is coming from a place of embarrassment, well then because I'm angry and do something stupid in my anger, then that only adds to the embarrassment, which makes the likelihood of me being angry again
Yeah.
all the more likely. It just becomes a vicious cycle that doesn't stop.
Yeah, I think that when I think of that, I can specifically remember moments where people that I know and love and I know their character, something would happen that on a normal day would not be a big deal. And this is what you shared through discussing David in First Samuel and discussing
Yeah.
these different biblical characters, Jonah and what was the other? Oh, Cain and Abel.
Yeah,
Like
Cain and Abel.
these relationships. I actually just shared with a friend this week saying, I was in a moment where this person really lashed out and it caught me off guard. And on the other side of that, I was left confused, hurt myself, wondering, what is going on? What have I actually done? And thankfully, I feel that I proceeded with grace and caution in that. But it was almost like a red flag. Like something else has to be here. Like this is not characteristic of them. And what I ended up finding out within a couple months after that moment, they were going through a lot of personal turmoil.
Yeah.
There was a lot of things underneath of, the giving the illustration, the rug.
Yeah.
There were a lot of things going on under the rug that I couldn't see, but I was a recipient of that trip and fall.
Yep.
And post that moment, I felt a lot more confident in forgiveness and a lot more confidence in offering up grace towards that person in mercy. And I think that in my opinion, is a next step for these moments, is not just doing that for others, but doing it for yourself, knowing that God is in that position also. What can we do practically to be the body of Christ for one another in these moments and for ourselves?
Yeah, like when you see somebody acting out of character the way that like David did in the story that I shared Sunday, it's an opportunity to get actually curious for those, because okay, David, this is odd. This isn't your normal demeanor. I mean, you have been nothing but good to Saul, even though he's done horrible things to you. Mm-hmm. And now this like random dude, you're gonna kill him and all the guys that work for him. Like really? Yeah. Like you can just see there. Like so, it's an opportunity to go, hey David, how's everything going, man? Like don't you like I think it said that he had 400 men that were gonna go with him.
Yeah.
Like, I wonder what would have happened if like the highest ranking official of those would have gone, hey Dave, let's talk for a second.
Yeah.
Are you okay? Because this doesn't seem like the proper thing to do. Mm-hmm. But he didn't, like, no one, and this is the problem, especially for people that are in positions of power. So, like, for dads, for pastors, for CEOs, for leaders, for, like, whoever it is that's in positions of power, normally you don't have anyone that can step up and say something to you. And that's the problem. This is why everyone needs somebody in their life that has permission to check them and go, hey, that reaction seems not so healthy.
Yeah.
Right.
That's good.
And that's how you get so many people that are in positions of power that are so abusive, because they don't have anyone to say, hey, let's figure that out. Like before we fire that whole department, let's figure out why it is that you're feeling a certain way. Whatever it is. Or like, hey, like if you just flew off the handle at your kids, like, can your spouse come up to you and go like, hey, did you have a bad day at work today?
Yeah.
Or like what is happening there, so the way I can better understand it. So like the practical ways that like, it's not just when you're the angry one, but when someone is angry against you, you can actually serve them if you have that relationship with them to go like, hey, tell me what's really going on,
Yeah.
because I don't think that it's actually about this.
Yeah.
And you can actually like really help people that way, because you can actually show them a whole lot of grace to go like, hey, even though you treated me poorly, because whatever it is that's going on, I'm going to still treat you
Yeah.
in a way to serve you and to love you, to take care of you. And we all need people like that in our life.
Yeah.
And I think Samuel would have been that person for David, probably. And we learned it in chapter 25, verse 1, that Samuel's now died.
Right.
He's gone. So who is going to be that voice for David? Who's going to be that person that comes along and goes, hey, I think that you're making really bad choices? Because even David has another instance like this later on in his life where, and this is the story that everybody knows David for. Like the story with Nabal and Abigail, who comes into the story right after the spot that we stopped. Not a lot of people really know that story or have ever heard that story, but everyone knows David's story with Bathsheba.
Yeah.
And that whole thing plays out. He has Uriah killed, takes advantage of Bathsheba and all this. And then the new prophet, Nathan, comes up to him and he goes, and confronts him.
Yeah.
And you could see that during that season where David didn't have that person was when he was ready to make that bad decision.
Yeah.
And that's why we have to have that. Like, husbands, your wife has to have permission to do that. Wives, your husband has to have the permission to do that. Sometimes you need to let your kids have the permission to be like, hey, that seems a bit like over the top, man. Like that just seems like a bit much. And rather than going, shut up, I'm your parent, like I can, whatever, like maybe you need to pay attention when the people at work are going like, hey, that doesn't seem like the punishment's not fitting the crime here in this situation. So that's the practical thing that happens when you see someone lashing out like this. If you're the one with the relationship, you should try to help them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that they're going to receive that any better, but it is,
good,
in the
though.
long run, it's the right thing to do.
No, I agree with that. I think that it is difficult, which it takes me back a couple weeks. If you've been following the No Offense series, it makes me think of the week we talked about having God's eyes and seeing things the way God sees them. And I think that in doing that, we can free ourselves from the offense of what's happened and see the person the way God sees them and see their situation the way God sees it and be able to offer that extension of grace.
Yeah. It's a lot like that. Like, again, if someone flew off the handle at you, but you already knew going into that conversation that 5 minutes before that they had just gotten a phone call that their whole family had been in a car wreck.
Yeah.
You would go, it's okay.
Yeah.
I know you're screaming at me, you're cussing at me, you're mad at me, whatever it is, but I understand where you're coming from. If you already knew that.
Right.
So why not just assume that every time someone responds like that to you, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
Even if it's like, hey, I just hate my life, so therefore I'm a nasty person to people.
Yeah.
Well, now we at least understand that there's a reason why they are the way that they are, and we can show grace to that. Like, Megan posted about this on her Facebook yesterday, but like she had an opportunity to really get challenged with this series. And she was talking to me about it, and because I've been like living in this world for like a month now of all of this, I was like, hey, let me just ask you first, what you're really upset about right now. Have you ever done this to someone else? Like, because if you have, then you have to just go, well, I guess I'm going to have to let this one go because I'm every bit as guilty. So therefore, I can't sit here and hold them to a standard that I don't hold myself to. Because I told Megan, I said, listen, I have definitely done what this lady did. I have definitely done it. So I'm not going to sit here and condemn her.
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit here and look down my nose at her. I do it all the time what this lady has done, okay? And so it's not easy, and I don't know that she necessarily loved that conversation.
Yeah.
Because what we want when we're in that situation and we're offended and we're ready to fight, we want someone to come and put their arm around our shoulder and be like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah, right.
Let's fight. Rather than someone go like, hey, are you seeing this whole picture? Like maybe there's something going on in her life. Maybe there's, whatever. Maybe there's a whole bunch of stuff that you just don't know. And so maybe we just continue to love people even if they've done us wrong, and we'll let God sort all that other stuff out.
Yeah. No, that's so good. Thanks so much for just diving deeper and taking us there and even reiterating some of that. For our listeners and viewers now, if you have missed any of the No Offense series, go back, re-listen, re-watch. The episodes are on our podcast channel, wherever you find podcasts, also on YouTube, SRCWV. You can find this series. It continues this weekend with Mother's Day. You don't want to miss it. I don't know if anybody has moms that get offended. Maybe no, shouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, do moms ever get offended?
I don't know. I love my mom, and I know I have offended her. So
Yeah.
do not miss out on this weekend. No offense. Our Next Steps and Discipleship pastor, Cheryl Ross, will be sharing, and she has been working and praying and prepping for what we are going to hear from her and the Lord this Sunday. We're looking forward to being challenged and changed by Jesus every day. Whatever your next step looks like, you can find assistance at src.life. We would love to help you take your next step in your faith journey. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to The Extra Point. Be sure to subscribe to the Southridge Church podcast and tune in every Wednesday for another episode of The Extra Point.